this. What about, what's this? Can I handle this?
Yes.
What's this?
This is proof that they used to drop black babies in the swamps in Louisiana and Florida for alligator bait. Now you would think,
Could you hold this so they
when I started collecting and I start seeing all this stuff about alligators and babies, I was in denial. I didn't want to believe that that stuff was true, but then over time and over years, you start collecting more and more, and then you have customers that come in to validate. You also have Agatha Christie, a novelist.
This right here?
Yes. Did you know that she wrote 10 Little Niggers? The Agatha Christie with the television program, Murder, She Wrote, Mystery, She Wrote. When I was in school back in the 50s, you heard about 10 Little Indians. 1 little, 2 little, 3 little Indians, 4. I never knew 10 Little Niggers came long before 10 Little Indians. And her method was, I think in my collection, I have about 10 of her books.
Wow.
All with the same title, but different graphics. Agatha Christie.
Wow. Wow.
It's a mystery.
You know what this says to me? Use the word receipts, which is a great word for this. Because I think sometimes unless you touch the emblem, the metaphor, the fact of the inhumanity
exactly
of this too often wicked country, that you can't really understand the subjective greatness that black people have had to muster to overcome it. Because in our community, it almost becomes cliche, right? To talk about how great we are, how much we survived. But when you see Agatha Christie, who people think of and want in a certain way, is writing books about 10 niggas, you begin to understand that greatness is not hyperbole.
No, and this goes back to Gail's question, is racism a mental illness? Because you think, what kind of mind does that, right? What kind of mind says, let me throw a baby as alligator bait? And so once you really understand, like for me what this also does is say, oh, Toni Morrison said, I've always known I was morally superior. Toni Morrison, I love that interview. She said, I always, and it's like, yeah, because when I see that, I'm like, I would never do that. How could that person be above me anywhere, in any place, in the workplace, in a doctor's office? I don't care. Like that person could never be above me. And then you move different and you walk different because you're like, no, I know where you came from. I know what y'all do. That's not what we do. That's not who we are.
That's rich. That's clappy. That's clappy. Gail, how long have you been collecting?
I've been collecting for almost 30 years. It was a hobby that turned into a business. And again, my whole mission was about when I'm finding this stuff, it's like, I have to tell somebody. I got to show people what's out there because I was not aware. And I thought, if I'm finding stuff that I never knew existed, there have to be others that need to know because our youth, our kids, there's a void there. Our grandparents or great-grandparents, they didn't talk about what happened out in the field, at the dinner table or when they came home in the evening. They were ashamed, they were, and so that information never got passed out. I never talked about Africa when I was growing up. My mother never said anything to me about, being proud of being from Africa. It was just the opposite. All we saw was Tarzan back in the 50s, and who wants to be, part of that? And so, and tagging onto that story, Little Black Sambo. Part of me connecting the dots with finding the memorabilia with the Little Black Sambo. It was banned back in the 50s, and it was a black child, had tennis shoes and a natural. The origin of Little Black Sambo, he was an Indian child. He was not African American. But they had, twisted the story and turned it in so many different ways. There are no tigers in Africa. And so if we don't understand the geography and the background of what they're putting in front of us, making us, seeing through their lens, we just accept it. And it just kind of, grows from there. So with collecting over many years, it got to be, I wasn't interested in the cutesy stuff, the kitchen stuff anymore. I wanted deeper. So the raw it was, the more racist it was, I wanted, because that was my proof. That was like, when I talk about the sociological, physiological, psychological, and the economic impact, and the malignant treatment and the benign neglect, that impact on the imprint of our mental psyche, not only for African Americans, but for all. And I do believe that it's generational. And so that post-traumatic slave syndrome is real. And so over a period of time, it's just going on. And it brings us to where we are today with the race relations just in turmoil.
Gail, I'm glad you mentioned specifically today, because I want to change tracks a little bit.
Okay.
And you're doing a good job convincing me to rethink this. But I want to raise the stakes and to some degree maybe deepen the conversation, to suggest, rather to ask, in what ways have the white gaze's interpretation of the black mammy influence how black women are perceived today by one another and also by black men? I was having a conversation with one of the producers because we talked about this show a lot just to get ready for it. And one of the things we both were saying, that there's a whole cadre of black men who won't date black women, either because they remind them of a mammy kind of person or they're not mammy enough.
Oh, that's
or
good.
intimidated.
That's good.
She said, "Oh, intimidated."
That's good.
Thea, help us.
So now we're getting into more of the complexities of the mammy character. So Melissa Harris Perry has a book, Sister Citizen,
and
she talks about the political figure of mammy and the sexual nature of mammy and the asexuality, to the removing, the saying that she has no sexual desire or presence or whatever outside of caring for, right? So when I do work on joy and pleasure with black-bodied people, what I talk to them about—
I set that up for you?
Yeah, you hooked me up. What I usually talk about, how I frame it though, is, let me give you an example. We all have that grandmother who will get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and she will start cooking with them old school metal pots. And we know she's throwing down, she's in it all day. And it's not until the end of the day when she sets the plate and somebody else tastes it, that she feels a sense of satisfaction. So there's this almost out-of-body experience with her own pleasure. It has to be happening through a third party because of the disconnect from our sexuality that came through the slavery character. The other character outside of Mammy that we know of is Jezebel, right? And so this character was responsible for seducing Massa and all these crazy things, right? So she's either hypersexual or she has no sense of sexuality, right? And so— Or pleasure. Generally, pleasure, no sense of pleasure, right? Because pleasure would mean I have the right to enjoy this body and this life and these things I create. Everything that we were told we were creating was for someone else's pleasure, from the meals to the house and everything like that. So what Gail was saying, and we've talked about the impact of this on mental health, on psyche, on perceptions, we're not the only ones viewing this, right? Like, other people are viewing these images of us and then assigning value and assigning their needs to us. So one of the things I usually share, I'm a black therapist, right? So everybody, I get so many emails about, are you seeing people? Are you seeing people? Because, there's not a ton of us. And people would prefer.
And I've had them all on my show.
Oh, you've officially.
I've had every black therapist in America on my show. But there's an interesting thing that I call the mammy effect sometimes, that we talked about on my podcast once, which was that, it seems like as soon as they saw a black woman therapist, they were like, she's going to take care of me.
Like she's going to
Understand.
And if I don't want to, which goes back to your question about black men, like if I don't want to take care of you like that, if I don't want to, if I want to be there and support you, but I don't want to mother you, then I'm an angry black woman. I go to the other one, right? Yeah. So I'm either one or the other. I have to be completely submissive and I have to be completely nurturing all the time. I can't have any other identity outside of that. Or if I stop doing that, then I become the angry black woman.
Can any of the women in the audience relate to this?
They know what I'm talking about.
Get a mic. Let's get a mic, because I want to hear from some of you in terms of what we're talking about tonight, because I can just feel, I can feel the heat coming from the audience. Yeah, because just anybody, grab the mic and stand up if you will, introduce yourself, and just tell us your experiences with exactly Thea just mentioned.
Hi.
Hey.
My name is Chris. I have experienced this on just about every single level that you've talked about. Before I started doing stand-up, I was doing reception work. It was like the first job I had when I was maybe 19 years old. And I came in one day, it was raining, excuse me. I had a headscarf on, and I was one of 3 black people in my company. And my superior at that time, she came in and it was a big laughing joke, like, ha ha, you look like Mammy, you look like Aunt Jemima. Like, this stuff is so triggering for me. And I remember going to human resources and saying, this is wrong. This feels racist. And they told me straight up, you have the choice to either deal with it because there's nothing wrong with it. You do look like Mammy with your head wrap on, or you can quit. And I said, oh my God. This is incredible. And then
And painful.
on another note,
And painful.
And painful.
Yeah. It made me feel very powerless.
Yeah.
And it wasn't. I'm finding it so hard to really embrace the image for what it actually means, because for me it was saying you're weak and you have no power in this space. The other
What's your name?
Chris.
Chris. Okay.
The other portion of that, I know myself, it's something I struggle with even now with my spouse. If I am caring and nurturing, I remind him too much of his mother, and then it will become difficult with the intimacy. But then on the other side, if I pull back, my strength is intimidating. I'm angry. What's wrong with you? I find if I'm not smiling, I'll have men in particular smile.
Why
What's
you're not
wrong with you?
smiling?
Why do you look that way? I'm like, I'm just concentrating. I'm just existing. But definitely, I've experienced that, and I'm 34 now, and it's something that I struggle with every single day.
Chris, that's so rich.
Yeah.
That's so rich.
Is that respond, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Chris, you can reclaim that moment with that walking into that space.
Yeah.
Because they don't have that kind of power. The truth is, right? So who they called you, now was an extremely strategic, cunning, and brilliant woman. Little did they know that's what they were calling you. They were calling you conjurer, they were calling you herbalist, they were calling you birth worker, they were calling you all kind of things that they have no idea. Isn't that funny that their ignorance allowed them to call you something that they were so ignorant about who she truly is?
But truth of the matter is, a big part of my own ignorance came from the fact, even talking about food. I know myself, if I cook, and I'm by myself, fine, whatever. But when I have guests, or if I'm cooking for my spouse or someone, I'm always looking for that. Is it okay? Do you like it?
Yeah.
It tastes
That
better
third
when
party,
someone else says that they're enjoying it. So that gratification, never getting that from mother, grandmothers, aunts, to say, you have the right to enjoy your home for yourself, your food for yourself,
And
your body for yourself.
Exactly. You have the right to pleasure.
Yeah.
You in your own, like, this is our body for a reason. We are here to experience things with it.
Yeah.
It was not just here for their labor or for any, it is here for us to experience. Is it an antenna? It is a tuning fork. It is all these brilliant things, right?
Absolutely.
That leads us through this world. And so reclaiming that, I encourage you to make the bomb dinner and you be the only one that eats it.
Yes.
That would be like something I would say. To the other point that you mentioned though, I wanted to say that can be a really difficult dynamic and line to walk, and that's not free, right? And so having a conversation about like, I want to be loved free so that I can not have to think about who I have to show up as. I have to think about that all the time in the world. I do not want to think about that here. If I'm having a kind of day where I want to be loving and nurturing, awesome. If I'm having the kind of day where I want to take up less space and that should be equally as awesome. And like how to begin to prioritize and take up space in real time, in first person, not through third person contact, is super important. And it'll allow you to create a deeper level of intimacy than we can when we have to learn to love through these constructs. We don't even know they exist within our relationships, but like we're trying to love through the white gaze.
Yeah.
Like, that's impossible.